Bam. So this like lovely little video here went up from Lord Esteban. We watched a bunch of Esteban's footage before on stream in case you guys are curious. Some of this stuff goes up on his Patreon, which is for Hold Back to Block. You can see here. You can find it on his main page if you want to support Esteban's content. This video is a cut from the interview that Esteban did with Keits up here. This is for the KI documentary. And he interviewed a bunch of people, including myself, for about 1 hour and 30 minutes, right? So he said a lot of his interviews are about that length. And so because it was such a long interview, there's some stuff in it that, you know, probably won't make it to the KI documentary that's going to come out early into next year. I think January is the planned time. And the great thing about this is obviously I have said a lot about how, hey, Netcode is great. We should really focus on Netcode. Netcode matters. And everybody's like, well, you're not a developer. You don't work at all these companies. You don't know how hard it is. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about, etc. So you get to sit here and listen to someone who has developed and worked on fighting games tell you about Netcode. Keits says he's worked on 6 or 7 games with rollback. Yeah, you guys have made games with rollback and also ported a bunch of games that included rollback in them, is right? The studio has worked on tons of stuff with rollback. So keep in mind, I probably won't talk over Keits. I'll probably pause every time I want to talk. So let's get into it.
Just what goes into its different flavors and the benefits of properly implementing rollback systems.
Also, yeah, KI is on sale right now.
Netcode's the most important factor in a fighting game because the players who play online need to find a match quickly, and that match has to be stable. And it needs to feel as offline as possible.
That's like, you know, we're 5 seconds into the video. Netcode is the most important factor in a fighting game. It's not just me, all right? A fighting game developer says to you, the very first line of this is, Netcode is the most important factor in a fighting game.
Unfortunately for us, this problem was basically solved in 2007-ish by Tony Cannon with GGPO. But I think the thing that most people don't think about with having good netcode is actually matchmaking. It's not just a factor of, can I find a match that has a low enough ping?
It's a solved issue. That's one thing about netcode that's very interesting, right? There doesn't need to be an argument about it. It's already been done. They already have it all figured out. That was 12 years ago. And he says the most important reason on why this, netcode is so great is not just playing people, but because of matchmaking. And obviously matchmaking is a big part of it. And it's one of the big benefits that people bring up when they talk about netcode being good.
When you have really good netcode that can roll back, you're expanding the search. The maximum tolerable ping probably for most people in delay-based netcode is around 60 to 80. Anything above that, and it's just unplayable garbage.
60 to 80 is not a large area. And it could even be that people in your area that are close to you, you don't have that good of a connection with. Anything past that is unplayable garbage, he says.
With rollback, you actually expand that. Now you can play people at 150 ping, and it feels like offline. And you can play people at 200 ping.
100 to 150 ping, and it feels fantastic. Think about that. It's like double the connection quality that you can deal with. From 60 to 80 ping to around 150. He says 100 to 150, no problem. 200 ping, it's a little wonky. It's a little weird. You're going to have some teleporting. Like when I play people from Europe sometimes, like Eastern Europe, and it's like 200 ping or something like that. It's a little rough. But the cool thing about this is that this area is actually much larger than you expect. If he says you can play someone who has 150 ping, if you go to a website and do like a ping test, I was doing this recently, right? From the center of the US, from Chicago in the Midwest, to Russia, Moscow, is like 140 ping. Could you imagine being able to play somebody from Moscow, from Chicago in the USA, and that's a playable match online? In Guilty Gear, I can't even play somebody from Arizona, from NorCal, from Seattle, from Texas. You know what I mean? It's like, oh shit, well, I don't know about Texas. Moscow? Sure, yeah, no problem. It's ridiculous to even think about it, right?
Visual artifacts that are weird.
This is on 200. That was a 200
like
ping
offline.
match.
And suddenly my matchmaking sphere isn't the 2 states next to my state. It's actually most of the globe.
This website right here, right? Los Angeles to London is 130. To Tokyo is 119. That means LA to Tokyo is a playable match.
It's very hard to find anything that goes over 150. You can find stuff that gets into over 200 from, if you're really the other side of the world. But like Orlando to London, that's actually probably not over 150.
Yeah, I guess that's fair to say that this website is pinging places from like super high quality connection fiber lines, like Keits is saying. So it's not going to be like your home experience, but that just shows you what it's like, right? If you play with somebody else and you guys don't have a lot of packet loss and the connection is good, you can play a super wide range of opponents. At minimum, you're playing everybody else in the US. It's why you see Sonic Fox playing against Foxy online. You can play New York to London, no problem. In fact, I'm playing LA to London in games, and it's not an issue. So the big thing that he brings up here is like, look, it's not just about the connections being good so you can play people. It's also that it improves the matchmaking. The sphere of opponents you have to play is so humongous. And when that's the case, it's not just like, hey, when you queue up for a ranked match, the only playable connection we can find is actually someone who is, 17 ranks above you. So good luck. It's instead, well, this guy is across the country from you and you guys are similar ranks, so you guys can now play.
I can care more about the rank of my opponent instead of just, is this connection going to be tolerable? And when you can do that, that means players who are weaker or newer are fighting more players who are also weaker or newer rather than getting bullied out of the game. And when they lose, they're waiting less time for their next match because maybe the same amount of people are playing KI as Street Fighter, but when Street Fighter is looking for a match for you, it has to start with a tight circle of low pings, and then it has to widen that as it fails. Whereas KI can just say, 150 is fine. Let's go wide. Let's find you a good rank match instead of a good ping match first.
I think what's crazy actually about this too is that if you don't believe me, you should look up a match in KI and see how fast you find a match. Like I don't actually know if this is like Esteban just starting a search right here. Like he just started and this is how long it takes. You should just see how quickly you can find a match in KI still. You can find a match so fast in KI. And it's just because you have so many playable opponents. KI has crossplay, so I can play with someone from Xbox One to, PC on Windows, no problem. And if you're playing an exhibition match, which, you can just search an exhibition match for your rank if you don't want to play ranked or whatever. You just search an exhibition match and you can play on anything. You can play on Steam or Windows or Xbox or whatever. It's no problem, right? So it's like sick.
Now suddenly a lot more people are having a lot more fun just because they're getting the right opponents. We know that having the right opponents is a key ingredient to addiction to this genre. It absolutely is. You have to play people around your skill level so that you can learn with them. Very few people have what it takes to sit down as a new player against, someone like me or a Jaywong or anyone experienced and tolerate that ass beating for long enough to climb through. You have to solve that problem, and the way you do that is rollback netcode. Rollback netcode also solves a lot of other problems.
That's the solution. That's all there is to it. It's not even just if you're new too, though, right? It's like if you're mid-level, if you're like a mid-level player, you want to be able to run into other players your level. If you're a high-level player, you want to be able to run into other players your level. You don't want to waste time for anybody by having these mismatched matches because the connection just wasn't capable of connecting you with someone your skill level. Whatever the issue is, this will solve it. By having this, you can just play people online and not worry about it at any time.
You can see when you hop online, you play somebody from Europe, yeah, there's occasional visual artifacts or whatever, but it feels like offline, and the reason it feels like offline is because the game doesn't wait for the opponent's inputs. So in delay-based netcode, you're going to need to have both your inputs, which you have as soon as you press them, and your opponent's inputs in order to go to the next frame. Let's say your ping is 90 to your opponent in delay-based netcode. It's roughly going to be a 6-frame round trip. So we already have my inputs. I don't have to send those and wait for them to come back. I need to wait for my opponent's inputs. So that's going to be about 3 frames. So if you have about a 90 ping and conditions are good, you could play a delay-based netcode game like Guilty Gear with 3-frame delay. That's pretty okay, right? That's not the worst. The problem is that because you have to wait for their information to come, what happens when the ping changes? And we all know it's not stable. It's 90, sometimes it's 80, sometimes it spikes to 120. Now the delay has to change dynamically. So the implication of that is that, I'm getting used to the timing of being 3 frames behind. Shoot, now suddenly it's 5 frames behind for a few seconds, and I've missed what I needed to hit. Now it's back to 3, okay, right? And some games display that in real time at the top, other games hide it from you. And then you get into real trouble when you drop packets. What if the information doesn't come at all? And of course, the game is going to bundle the next frame of inputs with the previous few frames in case that happened, so it can figure it out. But in delay-based netcode, the game's over when you don't have the opponent's inputs. We cannot go to the next frame, so the game stops. And you've seen it. We've all seen it. The game just stutters. It chunks out, right? The whole thing just freezes and stops, and it can't even take your inputs during those frames. So if you happen to be in the middle of like a quarter circle or a dragon punch, when it freezes, you might miss that direction entirely and you don't get your move, right? And people will call that eating inputs. And then you eventually get your opponent's data, and it does its thing to catch back up or whatever, but it just feels like garbage. The delay is changing, the game is stuttering. You need to have really ideal connections to play with people.
So you can imagine for like players who are trying to use online to play, and then you're trying to go from playing online and something like this to playing in a tournament, and your timing is all fucked up because you're playing online where the timing's 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 frames to back to 3 to 4, whatever. I can't hit a combo to save my life. It's like a really bad feeling because it's like you practiced on something that is supposed to give you practice. You're supposed to be able to play online, have a great time, and then go play offline. And you just lose your match. You get sent to losers, and you got to play Ken Tubo already, who's in losers. And now you're like, well, shit. Me and Ken Tubo both just got smoked. We can't hit a goddamn combo. Like, what are we supposed to do? And one of the big benefits of rollback is that it feels like offline, right? So when you're playing Zealous Coup, and you guys are playing on rollback, the two of you are playing against each other. I'm playing Zealous, and I drop something. I miss my combo. He punishes me. He hits his combo perfectly. It's like, boom. It just works. Look at this 18-frame delay. Good old Tiggy's doing quarter circles that are never going to see the light of day. In delay-based netcode, no one can hear you scream.
And how rollback netcode works is that we never wait for the next frame. We still have our delay of, let's say, 2 or 3 frames, whatever the developer thinks is right. So we're still going to wait 3 frames just to wait for things to get to us. So let's say we're at 90 ping in rollback netcode. 3 frames later, my inputs are going to play because we have that delay of 3. And I've got your inputs now. It's going to play. It's just like delay-based netcode. It's literally identical. Rollback is delay-based netcode, but it's got more features.
Under ideal conditions, delay-based netcode and rollback netcode is the same thing, right? He's saying, look, you're saying, well, my connection's always good with all these people. Why do I need rollback? It's like, okay, well, if you have delay-based netcode and your experience with some player is fantastic, then it's just delay-based netcode, right? That's what rollback is. Rollback is delay-based netcode plus. It's added on with all these extra features and things that make the connection qualities more stable and better.
Instead of stopping and waiting for your inputs, what rollback does is it says, I have my local inputs. I'm going to the next frame. I don't care. I'm going to predict what my opponent was doing. And all we do for that prediction is we just replay whatever was happening on the last frame. If they're holding forward, it's a pretty safe assumption that they're probably going to continue to hold forward. Maybe they stopped, maybe they didn't, but we're going to pretend they did. But in most cases, I would say 80% of the time in a fighting game, you're in a committed action. You've already jumped. There's nothing you can input to change that. You're already in a Fierce Punch. That's the next, 45 frames of your life, is you doing that Fierce Punch animation. Nothing can change that. So if that hiccup happens to happen during that time, literally no visual artifacting can happen. It'll be exactly what the game thought it would be. But in the odd cases where somebody was walking forward, we thought they would continue to walk forward, but they actually jumped or they actually hit a button. We're going to get their inputs a few frames later because they dropped them or because the ping went up. And then the game is going to be able to look at the game state, rewind a few frames to where we didn't have the inputs, and say, did this match?
Let's say you hit this Fierce Punch that Jago hits right here. And during this, he's committed to the Fierce Punch. And even during this time, you can see the inputs. He hits Fierce right here on this frame. But on frame 5, 6, 7, 8, he hits light punch forward and heavy kick, blah, blah. None of this matters. Who cares if he did light punch? None of that matters. If this heavy punch came out, then boom, it came out and that's it. Somebody asks about buffering a special move or something, or double jumps or stuff like that. In the game like that, if there's rollback during that moment, that is a situation where there could be some kind of visual hiccup or something if there is lag during that moment. But if there is lag during that moment that would make the game not able to show you, this movement or whatever, then in delay-based netcodes, the game will hitch and freeze right there anyway. So you might not even get that double jump or that dash or that buffer or whatever you're trying because you stuck out this button. And as you're sticking out this button, you're like, I'm going to input a quarter circle, right? But in delay-based netcode, if it lags, you try to stick out a quarter circle or you try to do a quarter circle, the game freezes, it unfreezes, you miss your down and down forward input, and you don't get it. You just get forward plus Fierce Punch, so you get no fireball. If in rollback netcode that happens, you input the quarter circle, it still comes out. You're still going to get Fierce Punch into fireball.
And if it didn't, it resimulates the game state in one frame, back up to the current frame, totally invisible to the player, and then it just renders the next frame normally. So in most cases, this will be like an invisible kind of correction. Let's do like a Jago overhead. He puts his hand up here almost instantly. He holds up here for like, 3-4 frames before he starts to chop downwards. Say we have to roll back because we didn't get that input, and then we have to resimulate up. So we missed the first 2 frames of it. So instead of him going up here for 4 frames and then chopping down, he goes up here for 2 frames and then he chops down. That's invisible to the naked eye. No one will notice that happened.
Yeah, it's so hard to tell.
You will notice is if a character we expected to walk forward suddenly goes backwards and their walk speed is really high, you'll see them, instead of smoothly going like this, you'll see them kind of jerk and pop to the other side, right? But if your rollback is built correctly, it's very hard to see those types of things happen. They almost never happen at 90 milliseconds. You'll see them a tiny bit more, but they're hidden pretty well at 150 ping. At 200 ping, you'll see some visual artifacts, but you'll always feel the same. Your end is always 3 frames. Your combos always work the same. Your reaction time is always the same.
This is another good example, too, of like, if a situation like this is in delay-based netcode, if you run up and you want to try to answer when he jumps at you, right, and it's in 5 frames, like, you have to, if you want to anti-air when he's here, you have to start anti-airing when he's up here, because there's 5 frames of delay, so your move's not going to come out for a while. I know that he's going to jump at me. I have to predict super early that I need to mash this anti-air like mad early, because otherwise it's not going to come out. I'm not going to get this comp. Like, you know what I mean? It's one of those kind of situations. In rollback, the game will always feel the exact same. If you need to anti-air him at a certain time, you'll anti-air him at a certain time every time. If like his jump is missing 2 frames of startup because of, or something, right, because of rollback, or if the overhead has 2 frames longer or 2 frames shorter startup because of the overhead or something like that, right, because there's lag or whatever, those things can happen if there's rollback and lag on that specific moment. But as far as doing your combos, hitting links, anti-airing stuff, any execution requirements, anything like that will always feel like you're playing offline. It won't change.
You can actually learn the offline version of the game online because of rollback netcode. And it's an old technology, and it's not a particularly complicated technology. It's just a matter of developers saying, yes, this is valuable to us and we want to do this. Look what this did for Killer Instinct. It has a thriving scene, after development has even stopped. People are finding matches lightning fast in this game. They can play people all across the world. Like, this is magic. You have to do this.
Yeah, it is unbelievable how fantastic these games feel to play online. And this could be every single fighting game. It could feel great to play every fighting game online.
So what's going on under the hood to keep the intense pace of KI the same, even when playing online?
Basically, the gameplay logic is decoupled from the rendering. So we don't, do gameplay logic and render in kind of the same thing. The gameplay logic can happen without the need to render a frame. The game is always in the gameplay logic. The game can run with the monitor turned off and never render anything, and it still all happens, you just can't see it happening. So think of it like that. And then when we get to a new frame that we all agree is the correct frame to render, then we render it. And that'll mean if we go to the next frame and we have both players' inputs, just render it. If we go to the next frame and we don't have the opponent's inputs, then we make our guess and we render that. And then if we go to the next frame and we got your inputs and our guess was incorrect, now we go back a few frames, but we're not rendering. And then we resimulate, we don't render, we resimulate, we don't render, we resimulate, we're to the new frame now, and then we render. And the player never misses a beat there. It just goes to the next frame. But underneath, it rewinds, and it gets us back up to current with proper gameplay logic, and just gives us the new state of the game visually. You don't have to design for rollback from the get-go. You can retrofit it. NetherRealm proved this. They retrofitted it into a very old engine, and they did a great version of it too. There's a GDC talk about this as well, where NetherRealm painstakingly goes through how many people and how many months it took to retrofit this into their games.
Yep.
But the important ingredients are already in most fighting games. Fighting games have to be deterministic, so that when you put in the same inputs, you get the same result. There can't be any variation there at all. Pretty much every fighting game on the planet is deterministic, and we know this because they all have replay systems.
Because replay is usually just a replay of the inputs, and then it plays it back for you. That's the deterministic thing that people always talk about for fighting games. However, just because your game has replays doesn't mean you can just put rollback in it right now. That is something important to remember.
They're not videos, they're input files. They're just replaying our inputs back to us, and because those will always result in the same game state, we get to watch a perfect replay of our match. So we know they're all deterministic already. What they really need to do is decouple the gameplay logic from rendering the next frame. That's the next big step. And then there are other steps in there to deal with problems you don't have to think about in delay-based. Let's do audio, for instance. If I do Fireball and Ryu yells, Hadouken!
Hadouken!
Cool. And then we're in delay-based netcode. I do the Fireball. It drops a frame, stutters, but it gets to the frame where he's supposed to say Hadouken.
Hadouken!
Okay, we're still good, right? It's a little stuttery and weird, but it's fine. In rollbacks, let's say I'm throwing a Fireball, and I get to the frame where I say Hadouken, and I yell Hadouken, but actually we just got the opponent's inputs and he jabbed me out of it. So now I actually didn't throw a Fireball. That was incorrect. We have to roll back the game state, come back up a few frames. I'm in hit stun now. I'm not throwing a Fireball anymore. The Fireball wasn't ever real, but my character's still gonna yell Hadouken.
Hadouken!
He already started yelling it on my screen. Now we need new logic to cut that audio off. So he goes, Haba! And then slice it off, go into hit stun.
Yeah.
But if you don't build that stuff, then you will see, like Street Fighter Cross Tekken has
Yes.
lots of audio artifacts. He'll yell Hadouken as if he threw it, but he never made it to that frame in, the resolved version of the game. You'll see VFX play twice, or, be there when they shouldn't be there.
Getting hurt. KO! I don't understand!
Me neither.
So there's a lot of considerations you have to make when you convert over to a rollback system. It is not free. You cannot plug and play GGPO. It's a great framework for network stuff, but you still have to do things on your end to prep for it and to make sure it's still all smooth and good. But I think what I want developers to understand is that you will have to spend money on netcode either way. You're either going to do the bad netcode and spend money on it, or you're going to do the good netcode and you're going to spend money on it. And yes, the good netcode is going to cost a little bit more money, but it's not like a choice between spending no money and a bunch of money.
It's going to cost you to implement netcode into a game. It's not free. It's either going to cost you a lot of money, or it's going to cost you a lot of money and then a little bit more to make it, whatever it is. You're going to spend the money to build netcode so people can play online anyway. You might as well spend money to make the experience fantastic and so that people can play online all the time.
So I hope developers will seriously consider using this framework, whether they write it themselves or use GGPO, which just went free license.
Damn the time.
Most fighting games today are still made in Japan, a much smaller country with a much better internet infrastructure. They still use delay-based netcode.
Oh man, I was looking at the screen and looking at Tasty Steve saying into level 3, the perfect timing. Thanks very much, Random BN.
When asked why these developers still choose to use delay-based netcode years after a game like Killer Instinct proved just how good rollback could be, Keits had this to say.
It's hard to speak for other studios, but you see fighting games made in the United States have almost all entirely converted to rollback. Almost every indie game made here also uses rollback. It's definitely not a cost factor that's stopping people from doing this. I think there also might be a business factor where they say, listen, the netcode we have, this really works well for Japan. And you know what, the audience in the United States, they're buying it anyway. They're complaining about it, but they're buying it anyway. So why would we spend the extra to do this? There's the legacy factor too, where it's not like they're making a brand new game engine when they make the next Under Night game. It's the next version of Under Night. So this is an existing engine that has working netcode already. That's done. Now you're talking about redoing huge aspects of the game just to get this new netcode working. So I think it's certainly a lot easier and cheaper of a question when you're starting from scratch and you're like, not only is this a new game, but this is a new engine, then you can really make those decisions. But I think part of the problem with a lot of the games coming out of Japan specifically is they are reusing the same engine over and over again. And they just, because the sales are still so strong all over the world, they don't really see a business need to revamp that end of it. And maybe they have it in their brain that when we finally move to a brand new engine, maybe we'll do this. Maybe they won't though. And that's what scares me. And until then, we've had a decade of games that don't have rollback. And then we've had versions of rollback that have come out that are, kind of poisoning the well a little bit, making people think, oh, rollback is super teleporty and bad because those have been kind of weaker implementations or broken implementations of rollback that never got fixed. But it's not like that. When rollback is well done, you need only play Skullgirls or KI or Mortal Kombat or Injustice or any of the great indie fighters that have this Pocket Rumble or Punch Planet. You need to only play those for a while to see that those misgivings are misplaced and that we could have a better future together.
This stuff has been done. It's been solved. U.S. companies primarily do it. Japanese companies don't, because that's probably what it is. He says, like, I don't want to speak for them, right? Because you don't know the exact reason on why they're not doing it and stuff. But it's great. People in the chat and people on my YouTube comments have been saying, well, I think Guilty Gear Strive would not be good for rollback. It's, you know, for this reason or that reason or this reason or that reason, or the game couldn't work with rollback. It's too fast. No, it would work with rollback. The game would not suffer for having rollback netcode. There's like weird, all these. I had a message that discussed with me about how, you know, screen freezing could be consequential, or, you know, this and that and that. And like all the people I've asked about rollback netcode who are engineers that I've worked on it said, no, the game would be fine with rollback netcode. Is there ways to design around it and make rollback better for fast-paced games like Guilty Gear or other games like that? Sure, but you don't have to, right? It doesn't have to influence your design decision. It's just up to you. I don't know. I would love to be able to play fighting games online with everybody. 99% of fighting game matches that are played online. That's just how it works. You don't have the time and money and effort to go play offline fighting games every day of the week to the extent that people can play online when the connections are good, right? This is something that's been solved over a decade ago. The only really things that we have about Japanese devs about rollback are recently, where they've been kind of replying, well, we see that people like it, but, you know, we're just going to kind of do our own thing for now. That's almost always the response. The Japanese developers are like, we see that people think this rollback thing is cool and stuff, but, you know, we kind of got life figured out for ourselves. So, you know, we got our own thing going. That's almost always the answer. The netcode for Guilty Gear Strive could be incredible if they wanted it to be. If they wanted you, the consumer, to be able to play online, they could make that happen. They're going to have online qualifiers for titles next year that have bad netcode online. Like, it's clear that they agree that online play is where a lot of people are going to experience the game, and they clearly think competition can happen on there. So if you're going to run online qualifiers for your game, the netcode better be very good, right? It better be something you focus on. You know what I mean? Like, Street Fighter is going to have Olympic qualifiers and stuff. Like, you shouldn't do that if you're not confident your netcode is good. And Street Fighter V's netcode is not good, right? Keits says, oh yeah, some people say Japan doesn't have a good way to even test this kind of netcode, but that's false. You can fake ping and packet loss easily in development environments, dev environments. You know, this is the thing, Keits. I feel like a lot of the times when there's chats about rollback on my stream, there's always interesting excuses that, like, if you bring them to a developers are like, oh no, that's just not true. Anybody who's anybody I ask ever who's worked on rollback, I'm like, yeah, how does this work? Keith says, we test everything with 150 and 200 ms pings with 20% packet loss just to see how it breaks. As Ramon says, if your router's dropping 20% of packets, you should throw it directly in the garbage. Goichi even says Dragon Ball netcode is bad. Well, what is he? Someday he'll win Evo. I can't trust his opinion on the netcode until then. Oh wait. The other Evo winner for Dragon Ball practices Mortal Kombat online every day with people around the world because the connection is great. Even if you are close, even if you're in Japan and you're from south of Japan to north of Japan, you might have a bad connection quality. Somebody says the ping from, what was it, Kyushu to somewhere was like 60 ping or something, right? If you had good online, players from Tokyo to far in Korea or farther into Taiwan or Singapore or whatever. Imagine if, like, the players in Japan or Korea could train with the Philippines. Imagine if you could play online matches from into Pakistan or something like that, right? If there's a region that could train with Pakistan online because the connection quality was good. Also, before I go on too long, you guys should thank Esteban.
Fighting games. As mentioned before, this is part of a much larger documentary on Killer Instinct that'll be out early next year, all made possible by our patrons, like these guys. So if you like what you saw and want to help us make more, consider becoming a patron today at patreon.com/holdbacktoblock.
Yes, Esteban is in the chat. We've watched a ton of Esteban's videos on this stream before. If you are not already, check out the YouTube channel, Hold Back to Block. Esteban uploads stuff all the time. Even Esteban has a bunch of cool stage footage from old Evo moments and has an older documentary on the FGC that's really cool. He has filmed probably some of your favorite moments that you watched from tournaments on stream or stage footage later on, has done a bunch of really cool documentaries and stuff. And this, as he said, is taken from one section of an interview he did with Keits that's going to be in the KI documentary. And after that, he's going to do the life and times of Steven Sajam Lion and what it's like to be a fighting game commentator in the scene. That's the next one. It's feature length. It's going to have a $17 million budget. I heard they got Tom Cruise to play Sajam. It's going to be a big one, so we'll see how it goes. Keats says, most of the time they find the fun in their prototype and figure out net play at the end. But I assure you that that is a backwards way to do it. Net play and other difficult tech challenges should be solved first. The online play is where everybody plays. It is how it is. You can't just have people at a local or a local scene or over to your house every day of the week. Like, I've already paid $60, which, by the way, fighting games are all like $60, which is like wild, with no features and bad netcode. Is like, whoa, okay, that's already shitty. But then you spend that $60 and you have to spend gas money and venue fee and parking and all this stuff every week just to go play the game, because the online is not good enough for you to just be able to play online all the time. And you got to buy the season pass for all the characters, and then you got to go to a local where you have to bring your setup because people don't have, like, you have to do all these fucking jump through 9 hoops. Imagine if, like, you wanted to be a competitive league player, you had to leave your house and go spend money every time you wanted to play if you wanted a good experience.